All right. So I'm just going to get right into this. Kyle Shanahan. I've seen multiple 49ers fans, some of them even in my comments on 49ers fan pages saying if Kyle Shanahan does not do good in this next season, which will be his third season, the 49ers should fire him. So I wasn't really going to make this video. I was just kind of going to ignore it. But I thought I'd just give my thoughts because I'm just going to get right into it. So, should Kyle Shanahan, if he doesn't produce well this season, if we have, another losing season, um, should the 49ers fire him? No. No. No, 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 no. Why am I saying no? Why am I very, why am I so confident in saying no? This is the reason the 49ers should not fire Kyle Shanahan um, in this next season coming up if he doesn't produce well. Why do you think Jed York gave Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch 8-year contracts? And a lot of people thought it was stupid. A lot of people thought it was outrageous. But why do you think Jed York gave Shanahan and Lynch 8-year contracts to stick with this team and to have him on the team for those 8 years, if no firings? This is the reason. Jed York knew what he was getting into when he hired John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan. He knew that these were the right guys to build this franchise around. Now, if you look, back in 2017 when we had Brian Hoyer as the starting quarterback, um, this is the thing. The first year, we were pretty much using Chip Kelly's roster. Despite the quarterback, despite, signing Marquise Goodwin, despite getting, Pierre Garcon, and multiple other names, we were using in 2017 we were using pretty much Chip Kelly's roster. This team was based around Chip Kelly and Jim Tomsola. Now, and then obviously our quarterback was Kaepernick, who we ended up not bringing back. So all in all, then you come into just this previous season. Well, not previous season. Their second season. They trade for, excuse me. This was Shanahan's first season. So then they trade for Jimmy Garoppolo in late. I believe it was late October. I believe it was like Halloween night when we traded for him. So then Jimmy Garoppolo becomes a 49er. We win those 5 games. We go on a streak, win those 5 games, and then we go on that hot streak. Then in the off season we get Jerick McKinnon, Weston Richburg, Richard Sherman. A lot of other free agents. We even I believe we got Earl Mitchell. No, Earl Mitchell was on the team last year, I think. But anyways, despite all that, we signed Jerick McKinnon, Weston Richburg, and multiple other free agents that we picked up last year. So then, we go into this season. A lot of sorry, my nose is running. But a lot of people have us, going to the playoffs. Then Jimmy Garoppolo tears his ACL. Before that, Jerick McKinnon tore his ACL. So you can't blame this on Kyle Shanahan. The first year was more like a rebuilding year. Kyle Shanahan getting to know the team trying to adapt to Shanahan's style of play. Then we hired Robert Saleh to run the defense. And obviously, our defense was trying to adapt to his system. We switched to a 4-3 defense. So there's a lot of things that go on in the first 2 seasons as a head coach when you're starting a rebuild. It's not a fast process. It's not just a 1-year thing. It's not just a 2-year thing. Yes, the 49ers are very close to, having a good roster as long as we can get, defensive players this free agency. Get that number 1 receiver we need, buff up our offensive line, obviously pass rusher, safety, corner, defensive back in general. Um, so it's a process and for a coach to come into a franchise to rebuild it. Kyle Shanahan came in. Jed York hired Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch because he knew that they were the right guys for this rebuild. That was a voice crack. But he hired the right guys. He knew in his mind to give him an 8-year contract. He knew he had the right guys to build this franchise around and to get the Niners to where they should be. Um, so it's a long process. It's not just a 2-year process. So to every NFL fan, to every 49ers fan saying that if Shanahan doesn't produce next season, he should be fired, you're wrong. You got to think logically here. You got to think when they were brought in by the 49ers, they were brought in to rebuild this franchise. Obviously to rebuild this franchise and then start winning, but they were mainly brought in to rebuild this franchise to get that quarterback, get that defense, get that offense in general, hire the right staff around him. It wasn't just oh, we're gonna hire this guy, we're gonna instantly win. We didn't have a roster to win. These past 2 seasons when Shanahan's been our head coach. We definitely could have won games if it wasn't for Garoppolo tearing his ACL this season, if it wasn't for Jerick McKinnon going down, and if it wasn't for us having just injuries out the ass. But you got to think logically. It's not a 2-year process. It's a very long process to rebuild a whole NFL franchise, and we are very close. We got our quarterback, we got our running back. We're getting there, but it's not like Shanahan was brought in to start winning instantly. John Lynch knew, and John Lynch and Jed York knew to win football games, you have to rebuild. They were John Lynch and Shanahan knew what they were getting into. They were getting into a rebuilding franchise. So as I said, it's not just a 2-year process. It's going to be a very long process. Yes, we are close. We're not as far away as other teams in the NFL in rebuilding. Like Raiders, we're way above them when it comes to the rebuilding process. We're getting there. We got that quarterback. We could use another receiver. We obviously need to buff up our defense more. So once we do that, we'll be fine. But to every Niner fan and to every NFL fan saying that Kyle Shanahan's not what people thought him to be, Kyle Shanahan's not the right coach, you can't judge Kyle Shanahan until he has that roster. Until Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch bring in a roster that should get into the playoffs, that could be a Super Bowl contending roster, you can't judge him. Until he gets that roster, until we get the roster we want, you can't judge how Kyle Shanahan is as a head coach. You can't judge how General Manager John Lynch is as, a general manager. So once Shanahan and John Lynch build this roster and get the right guys into, competing for that Super Bowl, getting into the playoffs year in and year out, you can't judge them as a head coach. It's a process. It's not just like I said multiple times in this video. It's not just a 2-year thing. So once Shanahan, John Lynch get the right guys for this Niners team. So, okay, for instance, say they get the right team. We have a shit ton of playmakers on the team. Our quarterbacks coming off or winning MVP. Kyle Shanahan's just this 49ers team's not producing, but we have the roster to produce. Then you can blame that on Kyle Shanahan. But until then, once we get that roster to win multiple games, to go to the playoffs year in and year out, you can't judge how Kyle Shanahan is as a head coach. Multiple NFL fans want to jump to a conclusion and say that Kyle Shanahan sucks because the 49ers, going into their third season, or coming off these last 2 seasons, Kyle Shanahan hasn't done well. You can't go off of that. Once we build this roster, once we get the right pieces in San Francisco, and once we get this roster, we're going to win games. We're going to get into the playoffs because Kyle Shanahan's a great coach. But until then, and I know that just by watching the Niners, just by hearing them in press conferences, and overall just, kind of knowing Shanahan, he's going to be a good coach. It's just once we get that roster in, that we need to win games, that's when you can judge him. But until then, I'm just so tired of people saying, oh, well, Kyle Shanahan sucks. Kyle Shanahan should be fired if he doesn't do good next season. It's a learning process. It's a rebuilding process, and it doesn't happen overnight. So until we get that roster, until we get the right pieces in this Niners team, that's when you can judge him. But until then, you can't judge Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch as a bad general manager and a bad head coach. But like I said, once we get the roster in, and if he doesn't produce well, then you can judge him. But I don't think there's going to be a problem with us building a roster to win because I know John Lynch and Shanahan are have a winning mentality. So once we get the right players, once we get everybody in, then you can judge him as a head coach. But right now we're in a rebuilding process. You can't judge him.